bear in mind it'll take us a number of years to get that spread throughout society, just the way it took us a number of years to electrify the country.
Sure.
And regardless of what mechanisms we use to distribute this. But anyway, our data suggests that there's a core of resources between Siberia, Canada, and Brazil that will form a central component of the free energy into the future. And it appears to be related to a crystalline structured element or molecule or something that will be dug up in Canada and mined there very successfully for decades and decades, and will be at the core of all of this. I can't say what the nature of that crystalline structure or material is. We just have a very vague description of it because of the nature of the language around it. But indeed, there's that kind of like little triangle there from Siberia, where they're also going to have some necessary component of this to knowledge base that comes out of Brazil, to the crystalline mine material in Canada, and that probably will form a control mechanism or some central core of these new electrics or new energy machines.
Okay. One other question we've had from our viewers is they're asking for you to elaborate on what they call the Female Power Collective. What is that? This is an interesting thing that's been building for a number of years. It was difficult for us to interpret because it's a very primal kind of an archetype, and for a long time I thought I was just getting it confused with the references to the Aquarian age and the feminine archetype that comes from that. But then after a while it started separating within our data, so I knew I was dealing with an actual manifesting set of circumstances. And so we started calling it the Female Power Collective, for lack of any other descriptor for it. Basically what the data is suggesting is that the whole of society will be, at a planetary level, will be topsy-turvy from a male viewpoint, in that the collective decision-making, let's put it that way, of the planet as a whole will be led by, and probably to a certain extent controlled or guided by, feminine input. Now, we're starting to see some of that at a social level, and by that I mean that within the United States, in this particular recession, depression, whatever you want to call it, we're seeing that males are the ones that are taking the brunt of the unemployment, and females, by and large, are not getting as laid off as rapidly. And in fact, it's left us with a situation where more than half of the workforce now is female. And so already we're starting to shift into a feminine collective for decision-making. And this is bound to have an amplifying effect as we go forward. But there's also something in our data that suggests it's going to have a very rapid growth from some kind of external situation that I can't really describe, because the level of, we probably don't have the words modeled correctly to get an appropriate viewpoint from it. But nonetheless, it appears that over the course of the next 4 or 5 years, if you think of the previous 100 or 200 or 300 years as being the male-dominated centuries, we're about to have that reverse. We're going to go into a transition period that will ultimately lead to feminine-dominated social structure. How will that, do you have any more detail on how that would actually manifest itself in day-to-day life? Or?
Well, as part of the reorganization after the nasty part of the revolution stuff over the next few years, and the disruption of the global infrastructure due to the earth changes that we're all going through, that we're all undergoing, the data suggests that our SOCs, our self-organizing collectives, will be by and large centered around individual women who will then join up in a neural network fashion into cells of larger and larger SOCs. And so it will be the sort of the order of the old Cherokee Nation form of organization around a tribal collective, only in this case, much of the center of that tribal collective will be female in nature.
I'll tell you what's kind of interesting about that is there's one forum that I read once in a while called thetreeofliberty.com, and now that you are talking about the Female Power Collective, it is a lot of the members on that particular forum are female. I don't know if that...
Yeah, exactly. See, that's expressing that archetype at another level, because archetypes are extremely powerful here. That's why it's very difficult sometimes for us to get the appropriate word to get the idea across, because an archetype will be felt at a personal level. You'll see it at your local social level, probably because you'll notice over this next little bit of time that almost all of your local politicians are feminine or female, and so on and so on. You'll start seeing this aspect appear over and over and over again. and then it'll gradually work it up to where we're dealing with it at a planetary level.
Does this mean that Sarah Palin is going to become a hero of the new era? Or
Well, I don't comment on individual personalities.
Right.
Because usually we don't get anything other than hot language around those personalities, in the sense that you either hate them or don't. And so it's kind of there's no nuance. It's too black and white for us to make a distinction in.
Right.
But nonetheless, it does. Actually, I would suggest no, because she was adapted to the male hierarchical structure, and the feminine sock order here, the self-organizing collective, will be a different form. It won't be this mass movement as we understand politics today.
Okay. We had another question from a viewer. It says, what are some of the more bizarre linguistics or linguistic patterns that you've come across here recently?
Well, we get some really strange ones. We had, for instance, in a previous report, I think in issue number 1, we had this thing about cousin Alexei. There's linguistics describing at a detail level some kind of upset, social upset relative to weather conditions and maybe even warfare or something going on. It may relate to even the central U.S. or the central European area or Central Asia. It's in that latitude area, but we don't know for sure what part of the planet. And within that, it suggests that there will be video crews out there doing what video crews do, which is to, photograph everything and present reports. And they'll happen to stop and interview this fellow, and then he goes on his way. And then later on, when they look at that video, they'll be astounded because it'll show that he's not human as we understand it, that he looked human more or less, perhaps at the extreme edge of some level of what we might consider to be human here on the planet. But the video somehow will capture elements that suggest that this fellow is a humanoid cousin of ours who just happens to be here. And then it'll send off a big scramble as everybody tries to hunt him, and they won't find him again. So that was an interesting bit of stuff. Another really curious thing that we've gotten recently, we've called brain creases. And it comes from the German word for crop circle. Germans call the crop circles corn creases because the corn or the crop is creased. It's not broken or bent. It's just sort of folded over. And what we're saying is that maybe, just maybe, the next order of crop circle will be imprinted directly into human brains, and that people will just be impacted, maybe tens of thousands or so. And the data seems to suggest that it's ongoing now, this process of corn creasing or brain creasing on humans. And we don't know what the purpose is. We can speculate about that, but one of the interesting effects is going to be felt this coming year when we still have the mainstream media. They'll try and divert us from some of the more horrific news of the day by reporting on these human interest stories of all of these people that seem to have a, quote, same dream at the same time at this particular point. And it won't really be a dream, but it'll be some kind of a shared common mental experience, if you will. It may be that we're all sitting around and all of a sudden the guys who are doing the corn circles or crop circles there in England or wherever are going to just suddenly decide, oh, geez, all these years we've been aiming our message at the crop, and the crop isn't doing a thing with it. They're just ignoring us totally. Why don't we aim our message at all those humans running around on the planet and see what they do with our message? And then they may beam that right into our consciousness. But it's going to create an interesting juxtaposition, because the people that, according to our data, that experience it won't be alarmed by it and might even feel slightly euphoric from the process. But those that don't experience it might indeed be very alarmed and are going to wonder what's going on. And so we get some really strange stuff sometimes.
Interesting. Hey, we need to go to a brief commercial break, and then we'll come back with Clif High on CPN Live.